How do you reprioritize on the fly and hit pay dirt for your values and your identity?
Welcome to the Jeff Heilman Project. My name is Jessica Heilman, and I'm sitting next to my husband of 30 years this July, Jeff Heilman. I am a stay-at-home mom of 7, been in the Silicon Valley area for
Almost 50 years. Out of the last 50
Yeah.
years, we were gone for about 7.
We cover systems each and every single week. And today's episode, we will be talking about constraint theory. And I'm going to pass the mic over to my husband in order to best describe what exactly is constraint theory and how does one go about effectively using it to become successful.
This was something that I watched Elon do and apply in the fall of 1995 when I was working for Global Inc. Zip2 is what Global Inc. became after it actually got funded. But the name of the company that I was working for at the time was called Global Inc., founded by Elon and Kimball Musk in September or October of 1995. I went to work for them in November of 1995 as their first employee. I was watching Elon apply constraint theory, but I didn't know what he was doing. And then he's talked about it since, and he has interviews about it since. If you want to be successful, the whole thing comes down to momentum and identity. If you can align your identity to the task that you're working on right now and be certain that it's the most important thing you should be working on, you can put your full force of will from an unbroken identity behind that task, get it completed, and then get that process repeated to the next, and then the next, and then the next. You won't bleed out energy, and you'll build momentum, and then you'll be able to get to scale, and then that which was once hard now becomes easy. That's biblical. The problem is, what is the system that determines what the next thing is you should be working on? And that's where constraint theory comes in. When you're able to align your purpose and your identity with what you're doing, and you know in your heart that you're not bleeding out any energy or momentum because it is the most important thing you could be working on, it is an unimaginable a level of focus and deep work that comes on somebody when they're not bleeding out and they know that what they're doing is the most important thing. It so phenomenally changes your relationship to work. I'm going to show you today a simple, repeatable, easy 3-minute drill that I could apply over and over and over and over, even multiple times in a day, to where you can be certain that what you're doing is the single most important thing you could be working on in that moment, and thus align all of your force of will behind that task, and then do it again and again and again, and you build momentum, and then you stop wondering if what you're doing is actually what you should be doing. A revelation that I had earlier in the year, I started reading and researching Napoleon's triage hospital system. 1,500 soldiers and 4 doctors and 6 nurses. There's a method, but then there's an underlying principle. There's an X factor for this. The method is you basically put them into colors, red, yellow, and green. The green represents people that are going to recover no matter what. You know, they got a sword wound and they need some antiseptic or a cut or a scratch. Then you have the goners. Those would be the reds. You know, get the guy at Saving Private Ryan some morphine so that he's comfortable while he dies. But he's gone. He's not coming back. And then you have the people that you would actually focus all of your time and attention on, which is the yellows. These are the folks that, under Napoleon's system, qualify as likely to recover with immediate care. Likely to recover with immediate care is somebody who has a bullet in their arm or a bullet in their abdomen that just glazes and they need to be bandaged up. But if they are likely to recover with immediate care, those are the ones that you focus on. And once Napoleon figured that out, he was able to take care of a field hospital of 1,500 or 2,000 wounded soldiers with a half a dozen healthcare workers, and it would scale. That is the method to constraint theory. But the underlying principle behind that is the thing that's the most fascinating to me. And I remember about 6 months ago, I went to sleep, I took a nap, and I woke up with this massive revelation. It was as if the golden thread of all life itself had revealed itself to me, and I understood it in the context of constraint theory. Here's the golden thread. What do every single one of Napoleon's field hospital soldiers have in common? What they all have in common is a propensity to get better. The soldiers that are going to get better, whether you treat them or not, have a propensity to get better that's pushing them toward recovery. Doctors don't make patients get better. What do? They remove the constraint to the natural life force's propensity to improve.
Once your identity is set, a soldier is convinced he's a soldier. So once he gets patched back up, you don't have to reconvince him he's a soldier. You don't have to sell him on
No,
who he is.
he's already in the Army.
He goes back to battle.
They absolutely do. But it's because of what? It's because of life, because of the life force that we all have in our bodies to perpetuate more life. Once we understand that every field hospital soldier who's going to get better, whether he's treated or not, has a propensity to get better, who's going to die also has a propensity to get better. That was the pivot point. And you could say, well, that doesn't really make sense, Jeff, because he's going to die. He is going to die if his wounds are mortal, but it doesn't mean that before he dies, he doesn't have that life force inside of him, the propensity to get better, that normalizes, that levels the playing field for all men, except for the blocker or the constraint that needs to be removed. And that's why the field hospital that has patients that are likely to recover with immediate care are the ones that are treated first. Even though all men are created equal, not all men are created with equal constraints to their natural life force and propensity to get better, which is why the ones that you want to treat are the ones who have the propensity to get better with the blocker that you can do the most amount of good for.
The Netflix series, The Home Edit. It is an organizational company, two gals in Los Angeles who are fantastic at organizing. Well, they came up with the rainbow system for organizing. And in their rainbow system, especially for high traffic areas like children's rooms, they actually will constrain the organized items that you've decided to keep into colors. When you have younger children who don't know how to read yet or who are struggling with being able to be organized, they will actually, beyond just organizing like items, they will group them based on colors so that when you open up the pantry or you open up your craft bin where tons of pens, pencils, when you can contain them within all red is in one area, all orange, all yellow, all green, all blue, it will actually help you to clean up much quicker, much faster.
And now we start to look at the theory of constraint outside of the realm of this metaphoric history lesson of Napoleon. And we start saying, well, wait a minute, how can I apply this concept of constraint theory to my everyday life in business by answering the question we just outlined before, which is how do I use constraint theory to align my identity to make sure that whatever task that we're attacking is the task that's the most important thing? What if there was one thing, one way, one simple method that you could do a couple of minutes every day that would literally put away all of the bullshit, all of the noise that we've got in our head? How do you know which project is most important? How do you allow your identity to line up that says there is nothing on this earth that is more important than what I'm doing right now with this podcast? Well, it's easy when you have something in the calendar because you have a commitment with other people. And even if you do 2, 3, 4 meetings, and so that you can push 2 or 3 meetings out of your calendar by being triple or quadruple booked, there's still only one meeting at a time that you're doing. That's easy to prioritize that. But how do you do that with projects? And how do you do it on the fly in seconds each day, or 3 or 4 times a day if you're changing roles and running multiple businesses as a leader? How do you reprioritize on the fly and hit pay dirt for your values and your identity without fail so that you don't bleed out momentum over a period of days and weeks and months of building a business? I'm going to show you the answer to that question that came to me on September 8th by revelation that shows you how to apply what we've learned from Napoleon in the field hospital in a 3-minute exercise you can do. Let's go.
As Jeff's preparing and getting his page ready, if you're an audio listener, go on YouTube and check out our channel at the Jeff Heilman Project and also our website, thejeffheilmanproject.com, where you can find the templates and what Jeff is drawing out so that you can do them. Download them for free.
Here's how I do it. It's a 3-step process. Dan Rome, when he draws who, what, when, where, how, why, it is a visual vocabulary. And he uses a box, a triangle, and a circle as arbitrary artifacts that represent the what category. They are nouns. It answers the question, who and what. can be represented by a square, a circle, and a triangle. Now, when I started to apply constraint theory, it clicked in my head that we're going to start with a goal. So, step one in our applied constraint theory on a yellow pad, we're going to start with a goal, and I'm going to write goal. Now, my goal right now is to build a cash flow empire because I have a tremendous amount of things that I need to buy and fund with 7 kids, 2 Hanoi kids, and sometimes people moving in and out of the house that need food, clothing, shelter, electricity, cell phone, transportation. I know that my physical body will be expired at some point, and hopefully before then, I will be able to reach a position of cash flow. So, cash flow empire is my goal, to where my passive cash flow exceeds my active spending habits. The next thing that I'm going to do is this little triangle. Bullseye for the target, triangle for the blocker. And I'm going to write at the top constraint. And I'm going to name that constraint. I've had quite a bit of stress over the last couple of days. My biggest constraint is that my nervous system is offline. I'm experiencing a tremendous amount of stress from a couple of things going on at work and financially and some personal stuff that we're dealing with. So my nervous system is kind of a wreck right now. And I know that because I've trained myself to know what it's like to be emotionally compromised and chemically compromised due to duress. If I know my goal is cash flow and I know my nervous system is a wreck right now, and that's my biggest constraint, and I'm telling you that it is. The next part in the application of constraint theory is for me to draw a box, and then I just call that my pixel. The pixel represents the minimum viable product of something I could ship by the end of my next work block. The biggest constraint is the nervous system offline, which means I needed a Diet Coke. I needed to rest. I'm sitting. And so this pixel represents the podcast. The podcast is the thing that I can ship that helps my nervous system get back online over the next couple of hours. I'll tell you a story about constraint theory and why it's so important to apply it from somebody very, very successful, which is Elon Musk. I'm working for Elon Musk in 1995. He was so focused. I didn't know how he did it. And about a year ago, I'm listening to a bunch of stuff on Reels, and I get different stuff all the time. But they were asking Mark Andreessen in this interview, what is it that Elon actually does? How does he run $500 billion companies at the same time, working less than a day a week at each of them? And Mark Andreessen says, well, what Elon does is actually really smart, really simple, but it's not really easy. Here's what he does. Elon shows up Monday morning at Tesla, looks through the entire business from the design on the cars they're going to ship in 5 or 6 years, all the way to the finished product coming out the assembly line, the dealership, the support system, the battery network, the charging stations, all of it. And he looks for the biggest constraint that week. Then he jumps on an airplane, flies to wherever the engineering team is sitting, and focuses all of that team and the surrounding team and the entire company working on solving that constraint in the assembly line that week for that company. And then he goes to sleep on the shop floor if necessary, making all the resources of the company, including the CEO and the private jet, available to that team to solve that constraint that week. And then he gets up the next morning and he goes to SpaceX and does the same goddamn thing. And then he gets up the next morning and he goes to Boring Company and does the same goddamn thing. And then he gets up the next morning and he goes to ChatGPT or some AI company or chip company or Internet in the Sky company and does the same thing. And so what's happening is the blockers, the bullets that are being removed from his field soldiers on the assembly line are the ones that are most likely to recover with the least amount of effort, is getting moved every week. And so in 52 weeks, Elon Musk will move the 52 blockers that are the biggest for that company to naturally grow based on its propensity for growth, while all the rest of the CEOs are getting ready to do the board meeting to talk about all the they should be doing but aren't, and the excuses why they're not. And when I heard that interview with Mark Andreessen, it clicked with me. The propensity for the field hospital soldier in Napoleon's army is to get better. Then you look at Elon Musk applying that exact same constraint theory in his business. You start looking at all the greats like Rockefeller. His X factor that made him all that money was the removal of the constraint of the transportation cost of oil, crude, back to the refineries, which he literally doubled and tripled and quadrupled down on every single day of his life, starting with playing the railroads against each other, and then demanding rebates for the railroads for the oil he was shipping, and then demanding rebates from the oil his competitors were shipping, and then starting to make his own barrels out of wood instead of buying barrels, and then starting to source his own wood in the forests, and then starting to put kilns in the forest to bake the wood to lower the cost of transportation of the wood back to the factory where they made the barrels, to then becoming tanker cars where he just leased the tracks and the engines. Once the Erie Canal opened, he started building tankers to move oil through the water through the Erie Canal because it was cheaper than rail, to then building his own ships instead of leasing, to then sourcing the steel to build the ships and getting the excess pushed off to Carnegie. And then he just put a pipeline across the back of the Allegheny Mountains and just said, to hell with the whole thing. We'll make it even easier. It was always about the biggest constraint to the cost of crude oil being at absolute rock bottom prices. And because of that, he was able to sell Standard Oil refined kerosene in each's quantity cheaper than his competitors could buy crude oil. Steve Jobs waited for years to ship the iPhone. Years and years and years to ship the iPhone. And you could say, how could he? He was so adamant. He was so much pressure. He just had to have stuff right away. What do you mean he waited years? He was heavy on the upstream side of moving blockers. He was adamant and urgent and maniacal about getting progress on moving the upstream blockers so that by the time the iPhone actually shipped, the entire supply chain was already done. And even if he wasn't first to market, everybody else that went to market with him was going to have to solve those same constraints if they were going to operate at the scale, with the retail market, with the peripherals, with the integration, with the app store, with the developer community, and with the licensing of music and digital streaming and visual content that was already done by the time the iPhone shipped in 2007. Now do we see that the application of constraint theory, whether you use my silly little squigglies or some other form of computer lean manufacturing or just-in-time fulfillment or Kanban or minimum inventory quantities or Six Sigma or whatever it is, once we understand the application of constraint theory from a founder's operating perspective, we realize that we can easily take our integrity identity and put it in back with the maximum amount of force to that thing which we know for certain is the single most important cause and purpose in our existence.
The seed of an apple, once that is planted, has hundreds and thousands of potential apple trees. It really drives me to that full, complete understanding of the propensity is to prosper. I say the propensity is toward prosperity.
Always.
Because it doesn't just make one apple. Every good farmer will understand the constraints and the blockers that are keeping their seeds from getting proper water, from getting sunlight. Prosperity will come from your successful application of these systems like the constraint theory, which you can find on the website. We will see you next time on the Jeff Heilman Project.